No sé molt bé quina hora és. Good morning or good afternoon. Let me introduce you to our next speaker. It is a great pleasure to have here today the woman that you are just going to listen to. One of the questions that at Sónar+D we have been asking ourselves lately, or this year, or for this year's program, is how it will be the internet of the future. And at Mozilla and Mozilla Foundation, they know a great deal about it. And it's a great pleasure to have with us Mitchell Baker. Please come and applause.
Thank you. Well, technology, and the internet are massive drivers of creativity and disruption. And that will continue for a while and will likely accelerate as the current batch of technologies take hold. So I thought it was worth thinking a little bit about creativity and disruption and what we've seen and how to think about what's likely in front of us. Does this work? Yeah. When the internet first appeared, it was like a spark. We called it the web, and you could see huge amounts of possibility, and that people would be able to do new things. And that's what we saw. We saw constant new things appearing. People would find each other, they would collaborate, new ideas, just wild new things happened that were related to what we'd seen, but really something new in kind with scale. And then the first sort of hybrids appeared, the first organizations that really understood the internet and began to build something new. And we ended up, as we have today, with a concentration, with a handful of large platforms that are interesting and exciting, sometimes really amazing and beautiful, and yet cover up so much else that was there before and sort of blot out so many of the other things that used to be possible. And so one question as AI and machine learning and the Internet of Things and sound and AR and VR and vision all get rolled up into the next 2, 3, 5 years. How do we maintain the joy and the creativity? And how do we make sure that humanity stays at the center of technology? And so sometimes that looks a little scary. And I believe, though, we are at the beginning of that, and we have a lot of opportunity in front of us to actually mitigate some of the problems and build something that's exciting. And being from Mozilla, we always think about the web as we understood it at first, which for us was open, interoperable, creative, and had the aspirations of sort of creativity, liberty, and excitement as human beings came together. Now, we've seen a bunch of that, and we've seen a range of other things too. But as we build the web and as we go forward, we imagine technology and humanity going hand in hand. And so one of the things that we do a fair amount is try to build technologies at Mozilla that are open, that are of the web, and that give people the most opportunity to be creative. And so, for example, vision is so critical to humanity. So I think it's obvious that AR and VR and mixed reality will be a deep part of the future. They're visual, they're immersive, and I think they will make it clear sometimes how dry text can be. So those things should also be open. And they shouldn't be one for Google, one for Facebook, one for Amazon, one for Alibaba, one for Tencent. Like, that experience should be both open to all of us and social. And so if you're interested or working on AR, VR, we have the early phases of a system that's like the web. You share a link. And if you go to that link, you can be in the same space as everyone else in that link. Different headsets, no content restrictions. You decide what you want to build, who you want to be with, and you don't need to worry about what are the rules of the platform. Another deeply human element is voice, or sound, more broadly here. But at the moment, we're thinking about voice. Today, we experience voice online as voice assistants. So that's nice. We get the ever-present servant to tell what to do. But voice is so much more. And so one really open question is, how does everyone get access to voice? Today, you can use Alexa or Siri, but there's no access to the underlying technology. And so another project we're working on is deep speech and common voice, which is designed to make our voices a public asset. Open source, it's data and data sets, so it's not a classic open source piece of software, but how do you get that analogy so every developer can use voice? And so that voice and voice-enabled items are available in all languages and whatever kind of products we can dream up and try. And so deep speech and the crowdsourced common voice is a way, it's currently the world's largest open source library of voice. And that's hard and expensive and takes a lot of data. Data meaning people, you and I, reading sentences. And so that is an open source project, commonvoice.org, add your voice. It's got two goals. One, make your language real for voice, not just voice assistants, but anything you could do with voice. And two, if you happen to be an English speaker, but find the current systems have trouble recognizing you in English, we have a separate project to make English a really globally useful language with voice. So one aspect of what we try to do to make the future better is to make sure that open source, public benefit, and creative assets available to all of us, are available in the sorts of new technologies. But of course, that's the technology side. And then there's the key aspect of really, where is humanity in relation to technology? Do we serve the machine? Are humans really at the center? And how would we think about making the breadth of humanity's creativity fruitful in the coming era? Because the interaction between humanity and technology is pretty deep already and will be much deeper in the future. Today, when we think about information or data or what happens to us online, we often think of it in terms of privacy, which is important, and security. But another aspect is all of that information is powerful in encouraging us to act or manipulating us. And so we can imagine a couple things. You could imagine, as human beings use technology, our brain patterns change. Just like if you're a concert violinist, your brain will have patterns from all the years you've spent practicing. That's beginning to occur as we use technology in new ways. The research is starting that shows how our brain is responding. That's human, nothing to be afraid of in itself, but the question is, how deep does that go? How much do we change in response to the technology we're using? And how much do we build technology that does the things we hope for humanity? And so we can imagine that as we interact with technology more constantly, more regularly, many times a day without even thinking about it, you can imagine that the creative possibilities are enhanced and that we end up doing new things and being humans with more capabilities or more ability to interact with the world in a way that's really exciting. And we would look at the technology and say, wow, that is really great. And we can imagine as well that the technology starts off exciting, and over time, it becomes more and more humans adapting to machines. One might say today, you look at the big platforms, and we worry sometimes about what's happening or the data or the security problems, but the piece that I think we haven't internalized as much is how much those platforms are designed to understand each one of us and to get each one of us to do the right thing. And take a social media platform, we'll take Facebook since it's in the news these days. The right thing is to stay at Facebook and keep clicking. That's the right thing. And so there's data in there, but there's also AI and machine learning, which is aimed at each one of us to get us to do what is the right thing. Now, the way of thinking about it when it's designed is to keep you happy. But it's the UI process for the social media platforms in the Valley is really about what makes you happy. And we know that you're happy when you stay on the site and you keep engaging. But now, it's beginning to look like what happy means is actually more like addicted. And the thing that keeps you on the site are very sophisticated mechanisms now. What's playing next? Those are tuned for you. Those are really intended that you are happy/addicted and continue to stay engaged. And so that's an example of where exciting technology that does allow us to do new things is now, with the use of data and AI and machine learning and the profiles built on each one of us, able to manipulate us or encourage us to continue to do what is beneficial for the system. And so that's the setting that really is not the height of humanity or creativity. And the other thing that we're experiencing today is that addiction economy or the attention economy is combining with all of human nature. Because when we look out at the online life today, you can see all of human nature. You can see the great things that human beings do, and you can see that as humans, we do some really unpleasant things. And much of those unpleasant things can be magnified by technology as well. And so we've seen the surveillance state arise. And more recently, we've seen not just surveillance, but we've seen antisocial or violent tendencies magnified and reach at a scale, with a speed and a scale that wasn't possible before. And so when you roll that all up, you get to some of the concerns of today. Are the platforms difficult for society? Are they difficult for individuals? And how, as society, do we build something healthy with all of this technology? And so right now there's a bunch of concern, well-founded, and the question of how do we actually encourage the better sides of human nature? How do we build something that's healthy in society? And one of the things that Mozilla and our other allies and partners have been doing here is looking more towards artists and the art. And what is it that the arts can show us as humans that help us understand this? Because the technical piece is deep and opaque and complicated, and for many of us, not really worth the time to understand all the details. And the arts have such a deep place in helping us envision new possibilities or new ideas. And so the glass room is here. That was an early example of visualizing data and privacy and what goes on. We, and again, our allies, have some grant programs for the arts and technology, how to visualize data, what does it mean, these images of people and technology, and how are we growing together. What can the arts actually show us about that? Because it's become clear that technologists alone can't do it. Sometimes the technologists aren't interested. Silicon Valley has enjoyed a decade or more of feeling that whatever's good for us and our companies is good for the world. And we should just build as fast as we can, and we're sure that our ideas are really great. And the fact that we're successful proves that whatever is good for us is good for the world. And that's clearly not true. And you can see some soul searching, but the real power comes from other parts, both from citizens and consumers and artists and the arts actually showing what humanity is and what's possible. Because as technologists, it's easy to think about technology or adding a new filter or a new control, but the core issue of what's our nature, what's our relationship with the technology, what does it mean to be humanity, how do we actually live in an augmented reality world? Not technically, how do we get there and what hardware, but what does it actually mean? How do we engage with each other? How are we social? How does that carry over? That is not the province of the technologists. And it is not the area where the technologists are best at getting to answers. And so we've found an increasing interest and appetite in more aspects of society getting really involved. And so we are hopeful that now that we understand a little bit more of what's happening, we can build the new technologies in ways that reflect deeper humanity. Because the AR and VR experiences, as I said, we now have a way that it doesn't matter what hardware, what headset, where you are in the world, you can actually join with others. It's a link, we call it the web. So that's great. That's a technical setting. What happens when you show up in that world? What do we do with it? Does it stay contained, or do those additions appear in real life? And what does that actually mean? And how much data do we need to have to really build an AR world? And how do we treat those things? And so the same thing, as I said, we see voice as a voice assistant now, but sound will spread throughout our technologies in ways I think we just haven't imagined. Sound and music are so critical to humans that I think with the right technology, we will find new ways to integrate sound into what we do and how it affects us. And so, it could be that the AIs of the future use sound to keep you happy and keep you at their site, or as a DJ knows, depending on the music you pick, you can encourage people to do different kinds of things. You can encourage them to dance, you can encourage them to leave, it turns out you can encourage them to buy drinks. So all of these technologies will have profound impact on our psyche. Like the early technology is just so crude that you could control, you could see how we were using it, but increasingly technologies are really aimed at how do we feel. And so as we think about these aspects, the question of how do we have open technologies so we know it, see it, can play with it, can do something different with it, how do we get humanity back at the center? How do we pull the arts back into the technological sphere and make better connections will become ever more important. And sometimes when you look out in the world, there's a lot of things going on right now that are concerning. Sometimes the state of the internet is one of them. But we are actually pretty hopeful that now that we understand more of the issues, how technology influences humanity, how we call them the big platforms, but really the experts and how that technology influences us, how that becomes known, that as we work with this new knowledge, we can do better. You know, the internet today has really great aspects to it, and we all rely on it constantly, but it's not good enough. It's not a healthy state, and it should be better. And so I have a call out in the Valley among the technologists that it has to be better. We as technologists need to make it better, but we as citizens also need to make it better, and as consumers as well, both by building better things and by holding to account the big technology players. And so we're starting to see societies and citizens do that. The privacy law in Europe turns out to be a leader. I predict it will be complicated, and I think it will not work as expected, and it will have some unexpected results. And all that is a necessary state of standing up and saying we want a different world. So I don't think that that law will be exactly as people expected, but it does start to change the discussion and say, you know, things do really need to change. And so that I think is important, and it starts to send signals back into the technology creators that something different really is important, and that societies will find a way to cause changes to be made. And so with that, I've seen that there are question and answer periods pretty regularly here. So I'd like to stop and see if there are questions or areas or topics that you'd like to raise or address. So please, feel free.
Hi, thank you. That was wonderful. I wanted to ask your thoughts on the future of user interface and experience as we're going to be entering computational space with augmented, virtual, mixed reality, sort of extended reality, and just being as specific as possible, especially if you have spent time thinking of EEG integration into the headsets, how we could be navigating the digital space with our thoughts and combination of eye tracking and voice, sound, et cetera, what would be that UI, UX, like a little bit further out? Sorry, such a small question.
with real specifics. Well, let me think for a moment. I'm going to start at the end of your question with really how much sensing of ourselves will go into the UI or into the data flow that gets fed into the UI. And I think that's a little bit further out, but assuming no catastrophes in development, I think I don't know, is it 5 years, is it 10 years? I don't know, but I do think that those kinds of changes will be developing, but I think they're going to be really unevenly distributed. I think you will have a small number of people experimenting with that sort of integrated UI, and the vast majority of people with something far, far more basic. So to try to get back to that question, I think that not the next couple phases, but I think that the UI will be much more about how do humans actually behave, which has a lot to do with movement in it. And so one of the aspects that I haven't seen as much about yet is, what does it actually mean? How about moving? What happens as we move? There's eye movement, of course, but I in particular, when I talk, do a lot of movement. So I think that's an element that's going to be in there. And I imagine that vision plays a huge role in it, because human beings, so much of our brain is devoted to vision, and we see so much that we don't actually consciously register, but the amount of sensing and awareness and processing that's happening behind the scenes is so large that I think that and our ability to process information around the edges of vision is so high that I think those are elements, and that's probably not as specific as you wanted, but more than everyone else wants to hear. So I'll stop.
Can I ask maybe, do you have any specific critique on the current state of user interface and user experience in AR, VR, MR, XR? What do you feel are, again, specific things that people are getting wrong? Where are they putting the sort of the square peg into the round hole?
Yeah, let's come back to that maybe, but for the group below. Anyone? Yeah, please.
Hi, nice to see you. You said at one point, you speak of Mozilla and the allies.
Right.
And I feel that there's kind of a battle for the internet, and Mozilla is who I stand behind and who I hope, I hope somehow we can help. But is this battle real? Am I just imagining it? And do you think that people are sufficiently alarmed?
I think it's real. And thank you. And I hope that continues to be true and we do a good job. Well, sufficiently alarmed. If I think about the internet alone, I would say no. When I think about all the things that are going on in the world and all the things to be alarmed about today, it's hard to say that the internet should come first. But I would say focus on the internet and technology is pretty key right now. And that, for example, the copyright law that's coming up, that's likely to be passed the next 10 days here in the EU, probably bad. It has a tax on links, right? Because the publishers, of course, have their business, they now get pennies or they get a small percentage of the revenue and Google gets the bulk of it. And so they're upset about, the snippets, where now Google, because it's helpful, just shows you a snippet, and you often don't go to the actual site. If the snippet has what you wanted in it, you don't go to the core site. So that's a problem for publishers. So what do? Well, you tax the snippet. And I feel like if you want to regulate Google, then regulate Google directly, but don't break the internet. So I think it's a terrible law, and I also think it is very helpful to propaganda states. Google may pay, but if you have to pay for real news, or you have to pay for information coming from the legitimate news and journalism and publishers that you've trusted, and there's something that looks very like it, and it's all free, like what's going to happen to news? So, that's 10 days away. That's a bad one. Net neutrality for sure, and all of these things. So I do think there's a fight, and I believe consumers in a normal life can make a difference, partly by partly outrage about what happens is helpful. It's a signal to legislators, and it's a signal to developers. The common wisdom is that consumers say they want privacy or security, but won't do anything about it. And that's true, certainly in the United States, it's true in Germany, where the stated concern about privacy is very high, but even the significant German companies will say when they try a privacy-focused product, it goes nowhere. Right, so two things have to happen, like the products have to get better, because privacy or security and convenience don't go, it's a scale. And at some point, consumers need to care enough and the products need to be good enough that we start changing our habits. And I think it's hard for consumers to do that until you really, really see there's a big problem. And it's very hard for developers to make products they don't believe are going to sell. And so I do think there's a very positive role for consumers. And I would say for prototypes or experiments. So we at the Mozilla Foundation, we've also done a series of funding of artists to make prototypes that show information, not because they're going to be a product. And the glass room, which is here, is maybe one of them, but because they start to make the ideas clear and they start to set the scene, and if people are really interested, it gives us signals. If we could make the right product, someone might care. And that, as citizens and a society, we have to change that. Because you really can't blame technologists for building products or not building them if no one wants them. So there is a bit of a cycle that we have to get started. Yep.
You talked about the interdisciplinary approach, like involving creativity and artists, and that there is even a grant scheme. Can you give some examples of some best practices where artists work together with technologists, or some projects that were granted in this field that were really meaningful?
Sure. Well, actually, I'll come back to the glass room because it's here, which is a combination. Those are the full version. We don't have the full version here, but the full version is a set of some are visualizations, but some are really art projects. So one is, who do you look like, right? It's just an experience in facial recognition and how recognizable you are, and who are you mistaken for, as well as because of the data sets, if you're a white man, you're a lot more recognizable than anyone else. And so you begin to experience that. For example, there was a data selfie project. So actually, we're finding more and more artists with technical savvy, or at least enough confidence to go out and ask questions. But in this, and this will be a US focused, but in the arts for understanding where we are and what's possible, that's the Ford Foundation, probably one of the biggest philanthropic organizations, the Knight Foundation, which is journalism and news and community, MacArthur Foundation. I mean, these are the biggest philanthropic organizations in the United States, working with Mozilla. So one example we found is that we are trying to be the technical partner to many of these larger organizations who know that we're in a fight for the internet and that you need a better internet for social justice, but are looking for a technical voice. So on an organizational side, maybe that's an example.
I think it's clear that if Michelangelo would live right now, he would probably not paint anymore. So artists are very technological savvy, and I think it's a great match to combine this. And are you more giving the possibility through funding, or is it also a real collaboration that developers are working together with artists?
Yeah, we're in stage one so far.
Okay.
Which has really been, I would say it's the last year to 18 months of pulling. Well, I would say that the artists and some of the technologists are working together, but it's at a small scale.
Yeah.
It's not at the scale of a consumer product yet, and we're not that deep into it. But we are finding in our org like the pull to combine them. Yeah. So one of the things about being at heart a technical organization is that you really need I'll call them the engineers, to want to pull something in to make it effective. And so we're still in that phase of here's what's possible. Although, for example, we did an exhibit just last week at one of the tech museums in San Jose, which was reality. And it was Firefox Reality, and it was a set of artists using virtual reality tools to show a set of things. And that was working much more deeply. So we're early in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Are you familiar with the Center for Humane Technology? Like
Yes.
Tristan Harris and what
Yes.
I guess they call the Great Awakening or whatever. So a lot of the conversation around the fight for the internet is mostly oriented around like this dystopian future, that it's bad for us, it's hurting for us, and there's all these negative effects. I think your perspective is different in that regard because it talked a lot about the benefits of the internet and how it increases our capacity as human beings. But because there's so much attention to all the bad things, like we're starting to see companies like Apple, for instance, who just announced this new feature called Screen Time, which is part of the software that's helping us manage our time with the devices and helping us manage our addiction with the devices. So from your perspective, how do you balance your vision for the future of the internet with the utopian, dystopian visions, and is that enough to just help us balance our time on our devices, to help us put it down more?
No, it's not. That I think is not enough. Well, I will say that in the very early days, because I was actually there in the early days, in the very beginning of the web, which is still a surprise to me now when I think about that. But we were, I would say, utopian and naive, in that we could imagine the collaboration and the change and the creativity in a positive sense, but we really didn't explore the depths of how bad it could get. And so it is learning that all of human nature is out there. And so in offline life, we'll say pre-internet life for a moment, like societies find a way to encourage or civilize or tame or socialize the worst of human nature. I mean, some do it better than others, and some societies are more violent than others, and many are more violent towards women, than others. But we have mechanisms for accountability and responsibility. And we don't have those same mechanisms online yet. So to answer your question, utopian, dystopian, to me, that's humanity. Like our species is beautiful beyond belief sometimes, and just degraded and horrific. I mean, as a species, we are all of those things. And so we just have to live with that. I don't think that goes away. That's just who we are on this earth. But we're so far behind in what are the mechanisms for accountability that sometimes I feel deeply discouraged, and sometimes I feel very encouraged because we've barely even started to try. So it varies. And then your question, no, it's not enough. Like one piece of software to encourage you to put your phone down is not enough, because the power of the AIs, as Tristan says, but the power of the machine learning aimed at you is a lot stronger than that. And so one of the things that we're trying to figure out at Mozilla is how to represent you. And one of the reasons why we still like the browser, even though people use phones, is that it's a place where we can. But the product planning for the other things that we're doing is like, as the product person at Mozilla says, a human being online, we are outmatched by the AIs and the machine learning and the data that's being used to manipulate us. So what are the products, what are the technologies can we build that are both shields, but that also work for us out in the world? Machine learning should be a public asset, right? And if we can build the data sets, they could be. So what do we build so that when you or I go out in the world online, the power of learning and algorithms and algorithmic thinking is working for us, not just at us? And, we haven't cracked that yet. We have some experiments out there, but we'll be talking about them. And so I hope you were the one. I don't know your name, but I hope that you continue to find Mozilla useful in those things, because that is actually what we're trying to do. So, cool.
Hello?
Ah.
I think you might have answered partly what I was going to ask, but I was going to ask, do you see ways forward for the reclamation of personal data so that it turns from being pulled from us, that we can then get to a stage where we are choosing to push our data from something that we are in control of, something along the lines of our signature. We give it when we choose to give it, but it is always ours, it is always in our control.
Yeah. Well, in the long run, yes. But how we get there in the current mobile big platform setting, it's hard to see what that path looks like. But, you know, I am an optimist.
What do you see as the obstructions to that?
Unknown. What does it mean for me to own my data? 2, we're used to free stuff online, and that has to get paid for somehow. So in many cases, maybe giving up your data is the best way to pay for it, and for many people. 3, the current system is unbelievably good for a small number of people. And that 1% piece is hard to break, you know, when you get a system that's really strong. And so we have to actually figure out how to do that. So for example, if I woke up tomorrow and I was Mark Zuckerberg, I wouldn't know what to do with Facebook. If I woke up and I was, you know, running YouTube, I don't know how to fix it. And so not only is the system set up, but even I think the people who really kind of want to change it don't quite know what to do with it, and it's hard to regulate. So I think those are the questions, and you know, what we really, I think, need is this phrase, power at the edges, which is, you know, from the internet design, but like, most of us, by definition, will not be the 1% who has power over the rest. 99% of us, by definition, won't be in that position of power. And so if we want to have control of our data, we have to build systems where control is not in one big centralized place, like at the edges. And I'm partly optimistic because that's where we started. And so I think we can get back to that, but I think it's, you know, it's going to be a bunch of funky stuff. Which of your data actually really makes sense to put on a blockchain? Some small pieces might be. Which of it, you know, so I think it's a lot of experimentation, which is one reason why actually having all sorts of people engaged. And I think that it may not be the world's quote, best technologists or the biggest technology companies that will figure it out, because it's a lot of pieces about the edges where technically savvy people, but doing something different with different perspectives, will have some different experiments. Is it? Yes, it says out of time. Thank you.